my last video, I think I may have predicted the end of Arcane. And obviously, it should go without saying, this video has spoilers, so if you haven't watched Arcane, go watch it. But in my other video, one of the main things that I predicted, the only way Jinx's fate could wrap up was a fake death. And depending on how you interpret the ending, I think that's what we got. So in this video, I want to give some pretty definitive proof, in my opinion, that Jinx is still alive, including the fake death. Now, I can't believe I'm saying this, but even if we interpret her as fully dead, I am able to forgive it, and I'll go over why. But I honestly am 99.9999% sure she's still alive, because it doesn't make any other sense for her character to wrap up in any other way, in my opinion. And there's simply just too much evidence to ignore. We know Arcane writers don't do anything without reason. So this is what the ending of Arcane really means, and why it is the only way it could have ended. Now, I'm not saying it's perfect by any means. There are definitely times when this season felt rushed. In my opinion, the Dictator Kate timeline was cut way too short, and her reversal back to Vi and her back to her old principles also seems like just whiplash. But to me, leaving some of the things out that they did actually serves the story, in my opinion. Arcane has always been a story where every element is open to interpretation, and I feel like that was even more obvious in season 2. I agree that it needed another act and needed a fourth act. However, I do think that some people are interpreting certain moments that are left out as a result of being rushed, when in reality it was probably intentional, as leaving it out better serves its ambiguous ending. One example being, I've been seeing people in the comments complaining that they didn't show Jinx and Echo discussing what they saw in the alternate timeline when he went to go save her from herself. The next time we see Jinx, she's basically showing up to the party to join the fight. We don't know what he wanted to talk about, and we don't know how much he actually told her. So when she shows up to the fight, we can either interpret that as her wanting to go out in a blaze of glory and say, hey, if I'm gonna die, I better do it for a good cause, or if she had a renewed will to live. I personally believe it was the latter, but I'll get into my argument for that later. And I wanted to mention, I absolutely love what they did with Victor. I mean, just his whole story, starting out being sick and benevolent, and this benevolent scientist who wants to help himself and the Undercity, and then seeing how much he wants to heal, and his conflict between that and, you know, using hex tech, and then eventually becoming this like supervillain who disregards free will and wants to impose his principles of unification. It was just such an arc that was built so well, and I know every character didn't get that, but I want to get into more of those dynamics and themes and characters in other videos, because where my passion really lies has to do with Jinx and her dynamics, because I just understand her character very well, being a fellow INFP like she is. If you know anything about MBTI, I believe that she is an INFP MBTI type. I actually did a video on that. You can watch it here. And to be honest, even though I know that this is an ensemble cast, I do believe that this is Jinx's story, and it is so revolutionary how they made a character like this the hero of the story. I can hear the comments now. What are you talking about? She's the villain. If you came out of season 2 with that conclusion still, I mean, I could understand if you came out of season 1 with that in your mind, but if you've come out of season 2 with that still in your mind, we've got a lot of de-brainwashing to do. But don't you worry, I have so many videos planned, not just for Jinx, but for all of the characters and themes. And keep in mind, I am not as much a plot person as I am a theme person. That is where my talent for analysis and interpretation really lies. And that's one of the reasons why I find Arcane so incredibly complex and beautifully special, is because of its incredibly complex and dualistic themes. And the characterizations are absolutely immaculate. Not everyone they're not all created equal. Ambessa certainly needed a little more work, but Jinx, Vi, like, just perfection. But Vi was supposed to have character growth in this season. If you thought that, you really have never understood Vi's character, and it's actually understandable because this show brainwashes you. And I want to get into that in another video and just dedicate a whole video related to that, because you are meant to see Vi as the hero in season 1, I believe. However, In my opinion, it shows us by season 2 that Jinx has always been the real hero, the big fat hero, all along. Now, when I watched season 1 for the first time, I was still watching with the expectation of the classic kind of story with the heroes and the villains. And because of that, upon my first watch, even I interpreted Jinx as a very sympathetic villain. But as I watched it a few more times, I realized how they paint her to be that way, but she actually isn't one. If anything, she is more of an anti-hero in season 1. She certainly is acting more so out of self-interest in season 1, even though she does make that choice to protect her sister, even though it means killing her own father, which I believe is a selfless act and a foreshadowing for who she becomes in season 2. But by season 2, we see that even though she's dealing with her own personal problems, for the most part, she is acting out of love and out of interest for others. And for this reason, this is why I believe she is the hero of season 2. Yes, Echo is more of the classic hero type. However, I do believe he is a side character. I still think that this is Jinx's story, and she is the one who follows the hero's journey arc, not Echo. But more on that in another video. I also understand the argument that there are no heroes and no villains in this show, that this is a show about how your greatest strength can also become your greatest weakness. It's a show of fatal virtues and flaws. And depending which character your values most align with is the character you're probably going to understand the most, and I think that's one of the reasons why it causes so much debate. However, I do believe there is enough objective evidence to show that Jinx was always really the good sister and was Vi's protector when on the surface level it looked like Vi was the good sister and was Jinx's or Powder's protector. I'll get into all of the evidence for this in another video, but for now, let's just say that it ended the way it did for a reason. This story, especially considering Vi and Jinx's dynamic and Jace's and Victor's dynamic, is a juxtaposition between love and codependency. And I've realized, especially in relation to Jinx's character arc, the ending has been written for two different audiences. The first audience sees Jinx as a villain and sees what she has done as irredeemable and thinks that she either needs redemption or needs to pay for her sins. And they can easily interpret the ending as her penance or redemption. But in my opinion, that's just not what the story is telling, especially when you understand it on a deeper level. And if we do understand it on a deeper level, her dying simply just doesn't make sense. We talked about in my last video how all Jinx has wanted to do in both season 1 and season 2 was to die, and how she needs to learn that death is not the answer. And for the first time after having Isha and the possibility of having Vander back, we see her renewed will to live. But after the loss of Vander and the death of Isha, she has gone back to her suicidal ways. I thought of the possibility of her going full Jinx after this and just accepting herself and embracing that this is who I am. Take it or leave it, I embody chaos. But what I think they did was so much more beautiful and so much better of a message. In season 1, Caitlyn brought up the theme of the cycle of violence. And in this season, we have seen Jinx for the first time reflect on the decisions that she has made. And someone in my comments brought up a really interesting point, and they said that because Isha is kind of like an embodiment or a symbol for Powder, instead of Jinx going full Jinx when she dies, it could be a reflection to herself how much she has not valued herself, how her desire for self-destruction is actually a part of the problem. And of course, Isha learned that self-destruction from Jinx's example. And I definitely think that this commenter was right, because I would say that this was a pivotal moment for Jinx's change. And at first watch, it might seem like Isha's death was for nothing because she killed protecting her older sister from Warwick, and then Jinx did the exact same thing at the end of the show. But while I think these two separate events, while they parallel each other, are fundamentally different. On a plot level, it seems senseless, both Isha and Jinx's so-called death, but on a theme level, it is a complex similarity and juxtaposition. Not only does it give us the feeling that killing of any sort, including self-killing, is senseless, which is part of the theme, this was the moment when the seed was planted that what she had been doing all along was living in a cycle that wasn't something that was her own. That the identity of Jinx was something that was given to her, but isn't fundamentally based on an inherent flaw, nor is it who she is. That maybe death, not only killing others, but herself potentially, is not the answer. That this cycle was, through no fault of her own, something she was born into, but also continued to perpetuate. And that she has the power to change it for herself, which is what I predicted as well, is that we were going to see her empowerment. We see this message reiterated through her conversation with fake Silco when she's in the prison cell.
Killing is a cycle, one that started long before Vanda and me, and that will continue long after the two of you. I think the cycle only ends when you find the will to walk away.
And to be honest, I'm quite disappointed in myself that I didn't pick up on these themes and predict it as the ending all along, because it's been so clear throughout this show that this show, even from the opening sequence of the CD going around, it's about cycles of karma. You hurt me, I hurt you. You do this, I do this. You act, I react. And so at first, she takes this message from Silco to mean that she needs to put an end to her own life. That is what it means to break the cycle. Fully embracing her identity once again as Jinx, thinking that instead of it potentially being a good thing, that it's just going to harm people, so why not put an end to Jinx? And what I really dislike about people who interpret Jinx as a villain, as well as seeing the ending, her repenting for her sins and paying for them through her sacrificial death, or at least that's how they interpret it, is that that would actually be her not changing and staying within the cycle. These people don't realize that it was self-blame in the first place that caused her to internalize this identity, which led to the reasons that she made those acts. Being so beat down by this idea that you are fundamentally flawed that you end up just embracing that identity. She simultaneously needs to shed the blame and identity that she has been internalized from other people, but also take self-responsibility and care for herself for the first time maybe ever. Recognizing that it's not her fault, but she can do something now. She can change and opt out of the cycle now because she has that power and because she deserves to. That contrary to what people believe she deserves, that leaving the cycle for her means self-love, valuing herself and shedding the Jinx identity. By people interpreting the ending as this message that if you're so damaged and you've made these certain so-called mistakes, that you should literally die so you don't harm others anymore, is such a self-deprecating and damaging message. In my last video, I said that the only way she would be able to heal would to be able to incorporate her identity as Powder and Jinx, but I didn't consider that there could be another option. We see the symbolic death of Powder through Isha at the end of Act 2, and we can interpret her death at the end as the death of Jinx, allowing her to become a new identity, a new person who is neither Powder nor Jinx, because both of those identities were never her own. Let me explain. As a child, Powder's identity was mostly focused on what her older sister Vi thought of her. She was constantly trying to prove her value to the tribe. And while Vi was supportive in some ways, in others she treated her in a condescending way. She treated her as weak, and so she was weak. Vi had a very strong effect on her self-esteem and self-identity. And then the identity of Jinx began to be imposed upon her as well. First, Milo calls her a Jinx, then after she accidentally killed their family, Vi called her a Jinx, and then when Silco found her, he continuously said that she is Jinx and let Powder die and that Jinx is perfect. And by the end of season 1, that identity has been beaten down on her so much by everyone around her that she fully embraces it. She simply does not resist anymore because she has been continuously brainwashed that she is a Jinx, as well as seeing the evidence of it because it has been playing out before her. When in reality, it was not an inherent quality, but rather a self-fulfilling prophecy because of the environment brainwashing her to believe that she was. This is another reason why I really didn't like this video, which basically started this whole series. Thank you for pissing me off enough that I actually started this. But she called a Jinx malformed, and that was just so offensive to me because it's literally the exact opposite understanding of the real themes and the truth of the matter. Jinx was never a Jinx. She just internalized the blame of things that were not her fault because others wanted to blame her for something that was either no one's fault or was theirs. And because she internalized this identity, she began acting on it and actually becoming a Jinx because that's what she believed about herself. And understandably so, because she was brainwashed to be from the time she was a literal child by her caretakers and after an extremely traumatic event that seemed like her fault but really wasn't. By saying that she was inherently malformed literally goes against like the whole message of the show, in my opinion, or at least the message of Jinx. And the reason that I'm okay with her potentially truly being dead in the end is because the show has made it clear that that is not the case. She was never inherently malformed, and we see that most apparent in episode 7. We see in this other timeline a version of Powder where she didn't experience the guilt of accidentally killing her family and being under the influence and manipulation of Silco. Even with the trauma of losing her sister and seeing her sister die in front of her, she's still a normal girl. And this further drives home this theme that anyone can become a monster in the right circumstances, and that Jinx wasn't inherently flawed, and that she never really was a monster. She was simply a victim of her circumstances, and that her biggest mistake was actually looking up to people like Vi and Silco and letting them define her instead of defining herself. But once again, that's very normal for a child. That's how children build their own sense of identity and self-esteem, so we can't even blame her for that. And that's not to fully blame Vi being her main role model and caretaker. I do have a whole video planned for her because I do have a lot of things to say, but one thing I will say is this: she was parentified and it was not fair to her. I think it was simply too much pressure for her to be a mother to Powder rather than just be a sister. And Vi herself was also codependent. Throughout the season especially, we see the codependence that has been there all along come to the surface and show who she really is. One thing I agreed about in this video is the conclusion. I just didn't agree with how she came to it, but I will agree that Vi is tragic. It has become so apparent in this season that she is hopelessly codependent. Vi gains her self-esteem by having someone to protect. But in addition to that, it's also her inability to let go of the past that hurts people around her. Vi continuously blames Jinx. She blames her sister for things that actually were her responsibility. But I'll get into that another time. Even when Jinx makes it clear that she is thinking about stopping the cycle by apparently ending her own life, the very first thing that she does, sexy time! Which, in juxtaposition to the pain that Jinx was feeling, was just the timing of it was just so grotesque. Which that scene was so interesting because on a surface level, it looked like Jinx betrayed her sister. However, I saw it as an act of love because she was simply trying to push her away so that she would let her go. To which Vi responds in which should be an act of love but comes across as an act of desperation and a desire to just prove her self-worth. Using Kate for her own self-esteem and to numb her pain, making an otherwise loving act between two people who love each other, supposedly, I'll get into that in another video, calloused and selfish, revealing that maybe she doesn't really love her sister or Kate. Once again, the surface and deeper meanings having the exact opposite meaning. What appears to be an act of betrayal is actually an act of love. What appears to be an act of love is actually an act of selfishness. Damn, these writers are good. And don't get me wrong, I know that it is layered, and from Vi's perspective, this is part of her allowing herself to have what she wanted, exactly like her sister said to do. But I still think she is going from one toxic codependent relationship to another. Jinx, on the other hand, is at least even aware that she needs to break the cycle when Vi never even comes to that level of self-awareness. And part of the reason when she showed up to the final battle that I believe she had a renewed will to live is because she told her sister that she was always with her.
I'm always with you, even when we're worlds apart.
Instead of trying to push her away because she thinks that she is just going to harm her by being near her, she is starting to accept that maybe she was never a Jinx in the first place. And it really took our goat Echo to help her to understand that. It was all of these situations, from the death of Silco, the death of Isha, and the boy savior coming in to convince her of her goodness, that led her onto this path. Jinx or Powder never really had proper guidance, and we even see that in the alternate timeline. While Vander being alive and being there to guide her certainly helped her to remain mentally stable, as he said, she was not really living up to her full potential. In fact, the way I see Powder in the alternate timeline is the hero before the call to the journey. Like I said, her identity as Powder isn't really who she really is. We still see her being somewhat codependent in that timeline. Even Vander points it out, that she's constantly filling other people's cup and not her own.
As good as it feels to pour everyone's drink, you need to fill your own cup.
We may see the Powder in the other timeline as more evolved than Jinx, but in reality, I think it's the other way around. Jinx has already been deep into the hero's journey, and Powder hasn't even really started yet. But this is something for a whole nother video. I want to get into all the philosophical and spiritual themes of this show because they are oceans deep. There's also so many themes of our influence on other people in this show. The way that Isha was influenced by Jinx's self-destructive nature to end her own life, and how much Powder looked up to Vi, and because of that idolization, that was also her own undoing. Or, in my opinion, something that Vi was more so responsible for to some degree. The same way that Jinx was responsible for the subconscious message of self-destruction that she gave to Isha. This is another reason why I believe Vi is the real Jinx, and why we see that when she died in another universe, I mean, obviously this is not the only reason. We have Heimerdinger's work, as well as the impact of her death on the upper city, but Vi was the one to plant the seed in Jinx's mind that she is a Jinx so thoroughly and so traumatically. In my opinion, she did create Jinx, and there is a large amount of responsibility that falls on her for that. And I think that this makes Isha's death that much more meaningful rather than meaningless like it might appear on the surface, because Jinx is able to empathize with the mistake that Vi made with her. The mistake of being a caretaker to a child and not handling their subconscious mind properly, perpetuating this cycle of even generational trauma, which is a whole nother theme in this show. I am telling you, there are so many themes. It is so complex and amazing. And I think that this is also a major indicator for her that she needs to stop the cycle. In so many ways, if Jinx died and intended to die at the very end, she would not be stopping the cycle. And Isha's death truly then would have been for nothing. Isha's death really only has meaning if Jinx learns from it and lives in the end. The death of Isha is kind of symbolic of the death of Powder, and how Isha took on a responsibility that a child should have never had to bear. Powder also took on a responsibility of being a Jinx, and Vi saying that you are a Jinx, not that something that you did was messed up, but this is what you and who you are. I feel like this is the most significant moment for her self-growth and character growth. So I'm going to describe the very end of the show in two different ways. The first way I believe to be the surface level way, the literal opposite of its true message and meaning. But if you have no mind for nuance, or if you see Jinx as this villain this whole time, which means, in my opinion, you don't have a mind for nuance, this is how you would interpret it. Jinx has a change of heart. She shows up to the final fight wanting to go out in a blaze of glory because she knows she's a Jinx and she'll never overcome it, so might as well go out fighting for a good cause. When she sees Vi on the ledge, she sacrifices herself to save Vi and embraces the doom of her own fate, which is what she's been wanting all along, which is her own death. Seeing that she deserves it for all the mistakes she's made, and that at least if she's going to die getting her wish, that she can do it for the sake of her own sister. She dies, and Vi is finally able to move on. Now, let's rewind and look at the scene again through the themes that we have been discussing. Jinx shows up to the final fight with a renewed will to live because she recognizes that she is not a Jinx due to what Echo has told her about the other timeline. This gives her hope that she can reconcile with Vi after all and really be with a family with her again. Which is honestly all she's ever really wanted, is family and attachment. That's been her MO the entire time. She cuts her hair a second time to symbolize that she is on Vi's side, also symbolizing how much she's always looked up to her older sister, wanting to be like her, the same way Isha wanted to be like Jinx. After Echo saves everyone, Jinx sees Vi on the ledge with Warwick. She tells Vi to jump, but Vi hesitates, not wanting to let go of the hope that Vander is still in there somewhere. Jinx in that moment has a sudden revelation, a flash of insight on many levels. She recognizes that Vi is the one who has the fatal flaw all along. She is unwilling to grow and she is unwilling to let go, and that has hurt everyone around her. This is the final solidification in her mind that she was never a Jinx, that this is a reflection. Her calling Powder a Jinx was a reflection of Vi's own fatal flaw. She also realizes that the only way that both Vi and her could move on and finally be free is if they completely say goodbye and sever ties with each other permanently. Because Vi would never be good for Jinx, and Jinx would never be good for Vi. In addition to there just being too much trauma represented by the other, their relationship is simply doomed due to a lack of understanding, particularly on Vi's part. In order to heal, they both need a fresh slate and to let go of the reminders of the past. But Vi will never let go of the idealization of the past. She will never let go of Powder, even though her idea of Powder is never who she really was. And in contrast, Jinx finally sees Vi for who she really is, letting go of her own idealization of her and seeing reality, recognizing that Vi never really understood her, nor ever could. That her sister's perception of her and how that influenced her identity was always holding her back. Not to mention, the conflict between Piltover and Zaun would not be solved if she were to stick around. With all these sudden realizations that I feel are evident on her face, she decides to save her sister from her own fatal flaw, once again taking the responsibility that really is Vi's and covering them for her. But this time being self-aware that this is what is happening and it's not her fault. And Jinx looks up at her sister and knows what she has to do. That loving her means letting go, not holding on. And this time recognizing not because it's her fatal flaw, but her sister's. Letting the idolization of her older sister die. And gives her what Vi cannot give her in return. Fully accepting her for who she is, with all of her fatal flaws and all the ways that Vi has hurt her, making the decision for Vi, knowing that she would never be able to do it, and in essence, surpassing her evolution, breaking the cycle of codependence and setting each other free. She looks up at her in adoration one last time as she falls, finally seeing her sister not through an idealized vision, but in her real state, finally recognizing her as just a flawed, parentified older sister who didn't know what she was doing, who simply loved her in the best way she knew how, instead of the voice of authority on her life because she's somehow perfect, but forgiving her and unconditionally loving her anyway, despite the pain she caused her and the path that she set her on early in life, while also simultaneously forgiving herself and her own fatal flaws. She looks into the eyes of Warwick and says goodbye to Vander, hoping that one last shred of humanity will allow him to let go of her, facing the fact that she could die doing this, but she doesn't want to. Both asking for forgiveness and her part in turning him into Warwick, but also pleading with him to let her go. And the daydream of the past, I believe, is actually Vander's, the tiny shred of humanity left in Warwick, as Vi and Powder are asleep. This tiny remembrance allows him to let go at the very end, and she is able to escape into the air duct. We see the evidence for this by Kate looking at the air ducts in the next scene and smiling to herself, but I doubt she will ever tell Vi because it's pretty clear that Kate understood what Jinx's intentions were. Jinx wants Vi to think that she's dead so that she lets go and is free to live her new life with Kate. It is the final act of unconditional love toward her sister, not the codependent attachment of holding on even if it hurts the other person because it's what makes you feel safe, which is what Vi was unable to overcome, but the unconditional love of letting go because that is what is best for everyone. And then the last scene that we see is Jinx flying on her airship just as she wanted to do in season 1 as a child, finally embarking on the journey of finding out who she truly is for herself with no one else influencing her and her past being left behind. Leaving behind any threads of codependence, any expectations of her that she was once trying to live up to, knowing that she is neither Powder nor Jinx, but whoever she wants to be, that only she has the power to define herself and never again letting anyone else tell her who she is. And that no matter what happened in the past, there's always the possibility of building something new, and that she is worth building it for.